Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our Student Success Act and Charter Schools webinar today. My name is Kate Pattison. I'm the Oregon Department of Education Charter School Specialist, and today we are going to talk about how charter schools fit into this new legislation. So with that, today our first part of the agenda is to really talk about what is the purpose? What are we doing in this agenda for this webinar today? And the purpose of today's webinar is to first really understand the components of the Student Success Act. So for many charter schools, this might be the first time that you're engaging with anything about this new legislation, and so we'll provide that high-level overview of the entire act. And then we really want to get into understanding how charter schools specifically fit into the Student Success Act, and even more specifically, the student investment account. So a big portion of today's webinar, we're going to be talking about that part of the legislation. And then finally, we want to gather questions about Student Success Act implementation in charter schools. So as we go along, ask all of the questions, and you can use the question feature in the webinar. You can use that link that I sent out with the Google form the other day with the registration for this webinar. And we want to collect all of your questions because your questions are going to help us do a better job of implementing this legislation. So a little overview of this really historic and monumental act. We have the Student Success Act that invests about $2 billion into the pre-K-12 public education system. And with this, we're going to see about 12 new programs being implemented and an expansion or enhancement of 16 existing programs, as well as some new features for accountability around equitable outcomes for our students in the state. What's really important to understand is equity is the driving vision behind the Student Success Act. And the measures, focusing on equity, we're going to really be measuring how this is implemented across the state for all of our, to ensure that our historically underserved students are being supported through these new investment dollars. Within the Student Success Act, there is support for the state school fund and some additional accounts. So the Student Success Act provides about an additional $200 million for the state school fund, and those are funds that flow through your district based on ADM. So we'll see a little bit of an increase with our school funding overall. And then there are three significant accounts. First, there's the early learning account, and that will get at least 20% of the funds. And then up to 30% of the funds will go towards statewide education initiatives account. And then finally, the biggest pot of money, at least 50% of the funds will be made available through the student investment account. So now we're going to go through each of these with a little bit more detail. So the first is the early learning account. And this is the smaller of the three accounts, but there are some really transformative investments here. First, this account will fully fund early interventions and early childhood special education. And this is huge. As a state, we've only been able to fund a small percentage of preschool-age children with special education needs. And now, so many more students who need that early support will actually be served. A lot of this happens with our ESD partners across the state. And so some of you might be a little bit more familiar with this, but this is going to make a huge impact on the level of support students have received before they show up at your charter school. This program, this account also increases preschool slots through the Preschool Promise and Oregon pre-K programs. Now, this doesn't create funding for pre-K through the state school fund like everybody really wants on that level, but if you're interested in establishing a publicly funded pre-K program, you can reach out directly to me. I've been in conversation with Brett Walker at the Early Learning Division over the years, and he's super knowledgeable about how to go about this. And if you have questions, he's a great resource over there. The next account is the Statewide Education Initiatives account. And so this is where a lot of existing programs are housed that will be expanded as well. And charter schools have access to a lot of these programs already. So first we have the high school success, which is first known as Measure 98. That will be fully funded. So that's huge. If you're currently accessing those funds, that will increase the funding that you have access to. Nutrition programs will be expanded as well to provide families who are living within 300% of the federal poverty guidelines for free school lunch. And so this will be a huge expansion, and I believe I heard Cole talk about this as really putting Oregon at the top of providing free and reduced meals for students in the nation. So that's going to be a big expansion. If your charter school has provided nutrition services, there will be expanded options also for breakfast. And if you haven't provided nutrition, now is a really good time to think about providing that, because there will be even more support and resources in those for students who are it's basically expanding the number of students who will have access to that. We'll also have additional money that will go toward the high-cost disability fund, and there will be more support for youth re-engagement, school safety, summer school for Title I schools, and we'll have funding for the African American Black Student Success Plan, the American Indian Alaska Native Student Success Plan, and the new Latinx Student Success Plan. And the department's also going to start doing some work around developing an additional student success plan. The LGBTQ student success plan will also, some work will start to happen around that. And public charter schools will still have access to these initiatives in the same way they've had access to them before. So if there have been specific grants that have come out and charter schools were listed as eligible applicants, same kind of rules apply. So it did not change any of the rules for charter schools here. So the really big one that a lot of folks are talking about, where a lot of the money falls, we have at least 50% of the funds being allocated to the student investment account. We're going to spend some time talking about this and getting into it. There are two stated purposes for funds under the student investment account. Number one, to meet students' mental or behavioral health needs. And two, to increase academic achievement for students, including reducing academic disparities for students. And you can see here, we're specifically going to be looking at students who are experiencing poverty, students from racial or ethnic groups that have been historically underserved in our communities with our districts and our charter schools, students with disabilities, emerging bilinguals or English language learners, students who are navigating the foster program, students who are experiencing homelessness, and then it's possible that the State Board of Education might identify some other students. And so this is really where most of what we're going to be talking about is centered. And as you can see here, really that foundation around equity and ensuring that all the students in our community have access and are experiencing benefits from our public education system is the heart. So, the student investment account. This is probably where some of you have started to hear about who's eligible and who's not. So we're going to talk about charter school eligibility. What's really important to see is, first and foremost, this legislation explicitly excludes virtual public charter schools. So virtual public charter schools cannot apply for these funds, nor can a district with a virtual public charter school count the ADM generated by a virtual public charter school towards their application. So in effect, virtual public charter schools are not eligible to access or generate funds related to the student investment account. So following that, for the rest of the schools that are non-virtual public charter schools, there are two ways that we see so far that charter schools can access these funds. First, as an individual applicant. So in order to apply directly to the department for these funds, there are certain specific criteria that the charter school would have to meet, and we'll go into that in more detail in just a minute. The other mechanism would be through district agreement. And so that means that the charter schools in the district where you're located, where you're sponsored, would participate directly with the district as part of their application to the department. So first, let's talk about those individual applicants, the charter schools that want to apply directly to the department. For those schools, they must have at least 35% of the students make up at least one of these subgroups. So at least 35% of your students have to be economically disadvantaged students, or 35% of your students have to be from a racial or ethnic groups that have historically experienced academic disparities, or at least 35% of your students are students with disabilities. And this is important, so if you meet one or more of those categories for your student demographics, then that percent also needs to be greater than the percentage of the district in the same group. So I made this little formula you can see down there. It's basically the charter school has to be equal or greater than 35% in one or more of those groups. And for that same group, they have to also be greater than the district. So preliminary assessment across the state shows that we'll have somewhere between 10 and 16 charter schools that are likely to meet this definition for this eligibility. And our hope is to publish a list of the schools that meet this criteria so that it's really clear to districts, to charter schools, and to everyone else in the state who we think these schools are. It's also a really good time just to assess your data and kind of look at who's attending your school, what are your demographics, how do you compare to the district, and this is kind of again, that equity focus of having really transparent and clear understanding of who's in your community, who is your school serving, and how are you doing with those students. So this is an area too, if you think you might meet this, but you're not totally sure, you can always reach out to me. And like I said, we're going to be doing some more analysis and sharing who we think meets this criteria. So for the rest of the charter schools, which really makes up a majority of charter schools in the state, school districts that apply for these student investment account grants can decide to include public charter schools in their grant application and their grant agreement. So if a school district includes a charter school, they must provide all charter schools in their district the opportunity to participate. So that's one of the questions we've received already. Well, what if the district wants to include this charter school but not this one? And the law says that they have to include all the charter schools that are in their district. The other piece that the law says is that the public charter school in the district shall enter into an agreement for the distribution of the money and provision of services, including any accountability measures required of the public charter school by the district. So there's a lot to unpack here, and we don't have all of this perfectly laid out in a really clear system yet, but we're working on that right now, and so this is really a great opportunity for you to ask us some questions. But what I can tell you is with the grant, so the district would be the applicant, and in that application there would be some articulation around what the charter school, how the charter school participates in that. And we'll also have grant agreements, and so those are kind of like the contracts for the money, and that grant agreement would also then include the charter school. There could be a way where the charter school is another component school of the district and really just seamless with the rest of the plan, how the district is going to implement the funds. There could also be a way where the funds are made available to the charter school to actually set their own budget and have things be a little different than what the district needs assessment has identified and do things differently than the district, again, within whatever that agreement states. And so we're going to be working with some of our partners around what those agreements might look like and what the grant agreement itself would look like. But what's really important here is the law says that the charter school in the district shall enter into an agreement for the distribution of money or the provision of services. So it's really important to work with your district around this to talk about what's going to be best, both based on your needs assessment across the district and at the charter school, but also within the relationship that you have. Is there opportunity to collaborate and not make sure you're not duplicating work, or is what is happening at the district and what needs to happen at the charter school so different that it should be kind of separate activities that might be directed by the charter school? So that really goes back to your relationship with your district and what that can look like, but there is some flexibility there. It doesn't say that the charter school can't have the money, but it also doesn't say that they have to have the money. Now, what I can tell you is that if a district does not include the charter school in its application, it does not get the funding for the students that are in the charter school. So there is kind of some built-in, I don't know if you want to call it precedent necessarily or direction there, but if the district does include the charter school, they do get the funds. If they don't include the charter schools, they don't get the funds. So it's a little different than some of the other allocation-based or formula grants out there. And again, it's just going to go back to your district charter relationship, and we'll continue to provide guidance on that and have some different pathways for charter schools to access these funds and for districts to navigate that as well. So this slide here talks a little bit about the process. So far, the department is working to leverage existing mechanisms. So in this case, the district continuous improvement plan processes to support student investment account applications, kind of that pre-work that needs to happen. Charter schools that meet the eligibility criteria to apply directly, so if you're one of those schools that wants to apply directly to the department, you should really pay attention because you'll need to begin this work now and really become familiar with the resources available. So one of the handouts that's on this webinar that you can download is called the Student Investment Account Planning Guide for the 2019-20 school year. This is also available on our website, and it will walk you through kind of what's expected of a district that's applying or any eligible applicant, which would include those charter schools that meet the criteria. So track along with that, because right now what's happening is some specific community outreach and getting ready to submit continuous improvement plans or strategic plans, and those are going to be due December 6th at the very latest. So for charter schools that want to participate with their districts, now is the time to reach out and start discussing how you can engage with the needs assessment process and with community engagement that's already underway. So the actual applications for the student investment account grants are going to be processed and released and all of that whole piece around late winter and spring of 2020, with implementation beginning next summer. So all of the pre-work is underway now, and now is the time to start really becoming knowledgeable and understanding what your district is doing and how you can come alongside your district, either as a community partner, as another component school, or decide if you qualify and are going to apply directly. You've heard me talk a lot just recently about community engagement, and with the equity focus in the student investment account and this entire act really comes authentic community engagement. So we're talking about specifically those students, families, and community partners that have not been historically or currently served by the district or your school. And so this act wants you to go and engage with those folks, get to know them, and create really meaningful, authentic opportunities for them to provide feedback into your processes. And evidence of this input and relationship building will be part of the grant, and there are going to be requirements for public meetings, at board meetings for the district, and then you would probably be doing the same at your charter school board meetings as well. So now is the time to start brainstorming with your charter school and charter school community and leadership to understand who is your school not serving well, who doesn't have access to your school, and then who is currently involved in your school but not at the table? So who's not represented in your teachers, who's not represented on your board, who's not represented in your parent group, and are there ways, there are, but finding those ways then to create opportunities for engagement with those folks to get feedback into how these funds could be used at your school and how your school can be improved with this investment. So when you start to think about how these funds are going to be used, there are 4 intended purposes, kind of allowable uses for this new money. The districts and charter schools will develop plans and budgets to spend student investment accounts on expanding instructional time, reducing class size and caseload, addressing student health and safety, and providing a well-rounded education. And I'm sure some of you are already starting to make those connections for your school about how you benefit from these funds, as these categories are quite inclusive and aligned to what most schools need. So that's fantastic. It's really going to be funds that make a big difference right away in our schools. And part of the grant also includes then how are we going to measure the impact that these funds have in our schools. So each grant for the student investment account is going to include accountability metrics or performance targets. Districts are going to identify, or individual applicants are going to identify their performance targets in following measures. So we're going to be looking at 3rd grade reading, regular attendance, 9th grade on track, 4-year graduation cohorts, and 5-year completers. In addition, and hopefully to provide an opportunity to track more timely progress, there will be the opportunity to set locally developed targets as well. So we don't know exactly how charter schools are going to fit into this yet, if they would set their own targets, or since charter school data is rolled up into the district data, it's possible that targets might only be set at the district level and that your outcomes then hopefully will benefit the district in achieving their overall targets. However, it's also possible that the more autonomy a charter school has with its spending discretion in the grant, that the charter school might also be held to its own targets. So again, we don't know exactly how that's going to play out yet and that accountability around that, and that might be either in the grant agreement or it might be in the charter agreement with the district on that accountability and what that will look like. More information to come, but if you've already started to talk about this with your district or have ideas or questions, this is another one of those places we really want more information. Another key part of this new funding are the accountability and transparency measures built in. Each district and applicant is required to conduct robust public engagement and provide evidence of this engagement. There will be financial audits of the grants. There will be public reporting on performance targets, and the department will have the opportunity to conduct risk-based audits as needed. So there's going to be a lot of talk about this money over the next few years as we start the implementation process, but throughout that process and ongoing work with this, there will be a lot of transparency and accountability built in. So more to come on that as we build the system. As well, with the overall grants themselves, once we start implementing, and the timeline for those grants for the student investment account, what we understand so far is that it will be kind of for a 4-year period where it will get reviewed kind of on a 2-year cycle. And within that, when an applicant, a district or charter school isn't meeting the performance targets that it's set in its application, there will be opportunities for different levels of support from the department. So obviously, there will be technical assistance provided to everybody throughout the entire implementation process. But for those districts that and charter schools applying directly that don't meet their performance targets, there's going to be coaching available. And this direct coaching will provide support around professional development and all sorts of other opportunities really targeted to that district around, probably the areas of support that it needs related to the targets that it didn't meet, and that will be at least a 1-year commitment. There's another more intensive program, literally called the intensive program, and this is only available to school districts. So even those charter schools that are applying directly would not be eligible to be selected for this program. So this is only for districts, and this is a much longer commitment, and it's also much more prescriptive. So this is kind of where the department would come in, do a collaborative assessment with the district, and then provide some direction on how the district should spend its money and implement its programs going forward. But again, this would only be for districts. Now, if your district is selected and you're a charter school in that district, one of the things that is possible is the department could be providing, and so a couple different ways. So if your charter school is part of a district that's selected here, and your school is knocking it out of the park, you're hitting all the areas, and all the students who attend your school in all the different subgroups are also doing stellar, then it's likely that the intensive work would focus more on district schools and district programs. But if it comes down to the fact that your charter school is underperforming and really a contributing factor in the district data to the district not performing well, it's possible that some of the support to the district will come around what does it look like for a district to do the oversight work of being a sponsor and holding a charter school accountable. So it doesn't mean that the department's going to come in and take over the charter school, because that's not what happens. You'd have your agreement still with your district, but there might be some more support that would go to the district around how to provide oversight and support to the charter schools. All right, so now that we've gone into some of the nitty-gritty, we're going to take a step back here and celebrate for a minute. As you can see in this chart, and as you all have experienced for the last 30 years, we've just had a really big deficit in how we've funded our schools in Oregon. And that percent gap between what schools are actually getting funded and what we look at the quality education model, that gap even got up to 38% in the 2011-13 biennium. And when we look at where we're projected in the next few school years, we're looking at shrinking that gap down to about 6%. So for the first time in 30 years, and for many of us in our schools, this will be the first time any of our students have experienced this, our teachers have experienced this, our leaders have really experienced this kind of investment in public education in Oregon. So it's really an exciting time, and I know that a lot of you participated in lobbying for that and working with your district and your community partners to encourage this to pass. And so just looking at those numbers, the conversation is probably going to change a little bit over the next few years as we think about what's happening in our schools and why. So we hope that all of you are able to access the funds through your district or applying directly, and we're here to support with that as we help implement this really amazing legislation. So with that, now it is time for us to hear your questions, and I see that some of you started typing those in, so please add your questions to this. What I plan to do is, this is where the webinar is going to feel like it slows down a little bit. I'm going to kind of read some of these questions and then either hopefully be able to answer them or acknowledge them, and we'll be able to do some follow-up as well. So the first question that got typed in was one of the first questions that I answered, and it was around virtual charter schools. So yes, virtual public charter schools, as defined by ORS 338-005, are not eligible for these funds, for the Student Investment Account funds. So it doesn't mean all of Student Success Act, because I talked about other pieces like High School Success, Measure 98, nutrition programs, all of those pieces are still available to public charter schools. But these new grants where 50% of the funds are going, no, virtual public charter schools are not eligible. And it is our plan to publish a list of those schools, identifying which schools would meet that definition and are not eligible. So let's see here. So one of the questions that was asked, and this is a really good question, is do districts get to apply the same pass-through rate to the student you said Student Success Act funds, and we're going to talk specifically about this student investment account in a second here. But the first question is, so the law doesn't specifically say, but when we think about that pass-through rate, the 80% minimum and the 95% minimum for charter schools to receive, that's typically talked about for state school funds. If your charter school is currently receiving other grants or other allocations and that pass-through rate is not applied to those, then you have more kind of opportunity to negotiate that with your district. So that would be part of that district charter agreement that you have to put into place if you're going to apply for those student investment account funds. So if you're going as part of your district, it's possible that there could be an administrative rate or an indirect rate or a whole, percent that goes through. So that will be something that you'll negotiate. And as we get more information and as we talk to more partners, we'll have more clarity on what our guidance is going to be explicitly on that. But at this point, it also, I would say, largely depends on what kind of role your district is going to play in relationship to the charter schools for those funds. So if your district is doing data collection, if your district is going to be doing reporting, if all of your activities happen underneath the umbrella of the district and the district is getting audited on the grant funds that you're spending as well, then maybe it makes sense that the district will have some administrative rate held out. But again, that's part of your negotiations with your district. So one of you asked for more information about school safety funds and how we can pursue those funds. That is also a really good question. I don't have more specifics today, but I made that note, and I would encourage you for sure to explore the Student Success Act web pages that we have posted on ODE. So if you go to ODE, right at the top of the page, you click on that, the Student Success Act, it'll take you to the toolkit, which will get into a lot of nitty-gritty. But then if you look at the top right-hand corner of that web page, it will say Home or Student Success. Go there, and that will be your landing page for all of the different funds and accounts and activities that are going to happen underneath this. And so any updates or any other opportunities will also likely be linked there, and you'll be able to see them. But I will definitely include some kind of follow-up on student safety and what is encompassed under that when we do a follow-up to this. So we have a question on how are economically disadvantaged students identified for the Student Success Act. And I don't have an answer, but I do have in the room Tamara Dykman, who is our coordinator for the whole agency around this. And I'm just wondering if you know that right off.
I don't. What we're going to do on, hello everyone, what we're going to do on the definitions is we are aware that the definitions in charter school eligibility are connected, and there is hope to get those definitions in rule by December.
Okay.
So, so we'll have more information for you on that. If they have any issues or concerns with how that gets defined, if they could let you know that, that would be helpful.
Okay. So if you haven't ever tracked before with the State Board of Education, if you go to ODE's website and then search in administrative rules or rulemaking, you'll get to a web page that we have, and of course I'll include all the follow-up for this, on which rules are coming out and will be adopted. And so engage with rulemaking as much as possible. around these definitions from that charter school lens, thinking about that. So generally, currently what we've done for a lot of the counts for economic disadvantaged students in charter schools, if you're not providing a nutrition program and your students are entering kindergarten at your school and they haven't been to another school where maybe they had already gone through the process of being identified or not, there's the opportunity to use the confidential home family income survey, and I send that out every year to charter schools and encourage you to use it, because that data, even if you don't have a nutrition program, ultimately affects your charter school on the report card and how it's compared to other schools. And so that's something we've talked about a lot, but again, going forward for this, it hasn't been explicitly defined yet how we're going to identify those students. And so more information to come, and again, the timeline we're looking at is by December, having those at least, wait, what did you say?
Oh, I'm sorry, I do have a clarification, because the question was just specifically on economic disadvantage, and I gave you an answer for all of the definitions. But in the law itself, economically disadvantaged students is as determined based on the eligibility for free and reduced price lunches under the U.S. Department of Agriculture's current income eligibility guidelines. So that's what it says in the actual act itself.
Okay, so and that will translate just to either the free and reduced form or the family income survey that we send out every year.
Yes, but we'll probably need to make that clarification and rule that it incorporates both. So thank you, great question.
Great. All right, so another question that we received here is, if a charter school is able to apply individually and directly meets the criteria and applies directly to the department, can the district still claim those funds? And the answer is no. So if your charter school does apply directly, those funds then would be allocated to the charter school and not made available to the district. And there is some requirement for like notification of each other. So if a charter school is going to apply directly, there needs to be an opportunity to make sure the district understands that. And so definitely, I mean, a really good thing to do too is to read the law. It's long, but once you get into it, especially all the bold language, it's not that overwhelming. It's actually very digestible. So get into that and you'll see that there's a requirement for the charter school and the district to notify each other of their intent to apply. All right, so a question here about whether or not, how to access the information. I will do a follow-up with all of our charter schools after the webinar concludes. It'll probably go up tomorrow, where I'll email everybody with links to the PDFs and links to resources on this. And then we'll talk also about the recording on whether or not we can post that. Right now we're having difficulty with posting videos on our website because of accessibility things, but I might be able to email that out directly to folks. All right, let's see. And then another question about defining students with disabilities. How will this be qualified? Does the student have to have an IEP? And what if the parent opts out of an IEP for that student? Would that student no longer be defined as having a disability? It's my understanding that yes, if a parent opts out, I don't believe that that student is still counted with an IEP, because I think it's just students with IEPs. But that is a great question, and I can provide some follow-up on that. But it's the current count of students. So if you look at your report card, you'll see what your percent is right now for students with disabilities. It's my understanding that's going to be the same calculation. So I don't think that identification and calculation is going to change with the student investment account. So kind of reference what your current percent is, and that is, again, something you can talk directly with your district special education director about what your percent looks like. And I'll try to follow up on that question about if a parent opts out, but it's my understanding that if a student opts out of special education and there's no more services, there's no more funding associated, that student is not counted as a student with special education needs. All right, so that concludes the questions that you all submitted. I'm just going to open it up right now. If you want to use the raise hand feature, I'd be happy to unmute you, and we can actually have a conversation, which might spark some other questions. So I'm just going to pause for a minute here. All right. Let's see. I just saw another question, a couple other questions pop up. So let's look at those. All right. So do we need to submit our own needs assessment plan if you're applying with the district? So I don't have an exact answer to that because we haven't said yes or no. However, what I would say is you should engage with your district in their needs assessment work as one of the community partners, and also consider doing your own needs assessment work for the charter school. So it's best practice. We're just talking about kind of like assessing where your school is, getting community engagement and feedback in how your school is doing, and where people across a diverse group of community partners think your school can improve, and then setting forth a plan. So it's quite possible that you could have a side-by-side plan with the district. It's also possible that your plan could be part of the district. So again, that kind of goes back to your relationship with the district and what you think is going to work best. All right. And then similarly, will we need to submit our own continuous improvement plan if you're applying with the district? So again, that goes kind of to your district relationship. So the district will submit its plan. It's possible that the district could call out separate kind of its own parts related to the charter schools in the continuous improvement plan, or you could potentially submit your plan to the district and then find some way, the district could find a way of rolling that up or including that in their continuous improvement plan. So if you're an individual applicant applying directly to the department, you'll be submitting your own strategic plan, documents, and all of these things independent of the district. But if you are part of the district, again, it kind of goes back to that relationship. So now's a really good time to talk to your district and think about what would work best based on your current operating, your current relationship with them and how you've done business. And then also thinking, how do you think you want this to look going forward? So this afternoon, we have another webinar. We're going to be talking to district folks who work in districts where there are charter schools. We're going to be asking them the same questions. What do you think would work best? What do you think the flexibilities should be so that we can have different types of the best thing happen for charter schools in their districts? So at this point, we have not been prescriptive with that. All right, so the next question is, how will the money be allocated? Is it dependent on need or dependent on student enrollment? How are the actual dollars determined? And it's my understanding that it's based on ADM.
It's based on ADM, weighted ADM, plus an extra 0.5 for students experiencing poverty.
All right, so it will be generated based on ADMW and that additional 0.5, yeah, for students experiencing poverty. One of the things also just to keep in your mind for charter schools is districts are going to be getting $3 per student in their district to help support funding district early indicator warning systems. And those are just really robust data tools that help identify, where things might need some support, what students might be kind of in need of additional support. And so that's just something to also be in conversation with your district, if that's something that you can access, because your charter school students are likely going to be contributing towards that. And if there's some way through your student information system, or if there's a different program the district is using, that you might just talk about if that's something that would also be helpful for your charter school to have access to. All right. Vanessa, I see your hand is raised. Go ahead and I'm going to unmute you. All right, Vanessa, did you have a question specifically that you wanted to ask?
Oh, you already answered them. Thank you.
Oh, perfect. All right. All right, we still have 10 minutes. Are there any other questions? A few of you have asked some kind of one-off questions, and so I'll follow up with you directly about those. All right, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up today. I really appreciate everyone's engagement in this, joining the call and asking all of these questions. Please, please, please keep asking the questions as they come up, because what is likely to happen is we're going to hang up and then you're going to have 5 more questions, and that's okay. Engage with all the materials online. There are so many ways that you can provide us input and send your questions to us. You can send questions directly to me, and you can do that. The best way is probably by sending me an email. That way I have it documented. You can also use that form that I sent out in the email with the registration for this to submit your questions. If you go to the Student Success website, you're going to see other opportunities to provide feedback along the way there, as well as access a ton of really great resources and handouts. You can see some of the examples of those on this slide right now. And Tamara is a great resource, and she's listed all over the website and on multiple resources as well for you to email her. But here is my contact information. If you don't already have it, you can also shoot me a text. That's my, oh, I put my personal phone. That's typical. That's not the phone number that you would call, so disregard that. But you can definitely reach me by email. And just send me a message and I'll record your questions. We'll put them all together and we'll be providing follow-up documents for everybody and continuing this conversation that is super important and super exciting. So thanks again for joining us, and we will be in touch.